The safe was wide open, displaying stacks of cash that represented more than most people earn in a lifetime. James Morrison remained motionless in his Italian leather armchair, breathing calmly, his eyes half open, watching his every move through his interlaced eyelids. Samuel Morrison, 62, entered the luxurious home office, his graying temples and calloused hands contrasting sharply with the opulent luxury around him. James had planned this moment meticulously for weeks, but his heart was literally broken into 1,000 pieces. At 35, he had built a tech empire worth $2.8 billion, becoming one of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. But in the last 6 torturous weeks, small valuable objects had mysteriously disappeared after Samuel's sacred monthly visits. A $15,000 Cartier watch, a few $100 bills carefully tucked into his briefcase, a limited edition Mont Blanc pen, a diamond-encrusted Yale graduation ring. Always small but meaningful things, always precisely after the visits of the man who had raised him since he was a child. The emotional pain was simply unbearable and devastating. Samuel wasn't just his legal adoptive father, he was literally the man who had saved him from a childhood filled with unimaginable nightmares. James still vividly remembered that crucial life-changing day 27 years ago when, at the age of 8, he was desperately running away from yet another abusive and neglectful foster family in Southside Chicago. Samuel, then a dedicated municipal school bus driver, found him crying inconsolably at a freezing bus stop during a brutal and merciless snowstorm in the harsh winter. "Hey kid, are you okay? You look scared," Samuel had asked with genuine paternal concern, kneeling carefully down to James' height, his deep brown eyes radiating natural kindness and human warmth. "It looks like you desperately need a real home, not another cold, temporary place." Samuel was single and hardworking, religiously dedicating himself to 2 grueling, low-paying jobs to afford a small 2-bedroom apartment on the west side. But he opened his generous heart and modest home to a traumatized white boy who had been completely abandoned by a broken system. 4 years, they fought together against every adversity imaginable, Samuel working impossible and exhausting double shifts while James studied obsessively and determinedly, both dreaming intensely of a radically better future for their unconventional interracial family. "Education is your only real and definitive way out of this cycle of poverty," Samuel always repeated with absolute and unshakable conviction, even when he was completely exhausted after 16 consecutive hours of hard work. "It doesn't matter one bit where you originally came from, my precious son. What really matters is where you are determined to go with your life and talents." Now, decades after overcoming so many difficulties together, James was an internationally recognized billionaire and respected in the most exclusive business circles, but Samuel still stubbornly lived in the same modest and simple apartment, categorically refusing any significant financial help that James lovingly offered him every month. "Personal pride is literally all an honest man has in this cruel world," he would always reply diplomatically when James insisted on buying him a better house, a new car, or any luxury. The monthly visits were absolutely sacred to both of them, an unquestionable family tradition. Samuel would drive his worn-out 2010 Honda Civic to the imposing mansion in Winnetka. They would have dinner together in the elegant dining room, talk extensively about complex business matters, personal life, exciting shared memories, ambitious future plans. But lately, James had noticed valuable items systematically disappearing mysteriously. And a particularly poisonous and insidious voice in his head whispered absolutely terrible doubts about Samuel's true motivations. The test was psychologically simple but brutal. Leave the safe strategically open with a tempting fortune in plain sight and finally find out if his growing and painful suspicions were grounded in reality or just unfounded paranoia. James hated himself deeply for devising this, but he desperately needed to know the definitive truth. Samuel casually entered the office looking for James, as he always did religiously when he arrived for his family visits. He saw his son apparently sleeping peacefully in the armchair and smiled with genuine warm paternal tenderness. "Working late again, my dedicated and ambitious boy," he murmured softly so as not to wake him, automatically picking up a soft blanket nearby to cover him affectionately as he had done when he was a child. It was precisely then that his experienced and observant eyes noticed the safe completely open and exposed. James literally held his breath, emotionally preparing himself to have his heart broken into 1,000 irreparable pieces. But what happened in the next crucial moments left him completely paralyzed with shock and utter disbelief. Samuel did not touch a single note of the abundantly exposed and tempting money. Instead, he immediately noticed that the bills were completely disorganized and began meticulously arranging them with extreme care and reverence, separating them precisely by denomination and stacking them with the mathematical precision of someone who truly understood the sacred value of money earned through honest work, sweat, and tireless dedication. As he carefully organized each stack with delicate movements, Samuel spoke softly to himself with paternal affection. "My precious, hard-working boy, devoting himself so intensely to business that he doesn't even have enough time to properly organize his own personal belongings. Just like the father who raised him with so much love." After methodically arranging all the money in perfect, impeccable order, Samuel gently closed the heavy safe, left a carefully folded handwritten note beside it, and lovingly covered James with a soft blanket, kissing his forehead with the same infinite affection he had shown when James was a frightened and vulnerable child. "Sleep well and peacefully, my beloved son and pride of my life. Daddy will always take good care of you, no matter what happens in the world." James felt warm, salty tears silently roll down his face as Samuel quietly left the office with silent footsteps. With hands literally shaking from overwhelming emotion, he picked up the carefully folded, handwritten note. "Your money was completely messy and disorganized, my dear precious son. I organized everything exactly as you patiently taught me to do when you were little, and we organized your coins together at the kitchen table. Your father who loves you unconditionally forever, Samuel." The devastating and overwhelming shame James felt was absolutely overwhelming, like a destructive emotional avalanche. How could he have even criminally suspected the holy and upright man who had literally sacrificed everything for him? The exemplary man who had taught him unbreakable core values, unwavering character, and genuinely unconditional love throughout his crucial formative years? But then a psychologically terrifying and devastating realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Where exactly had these poisonous and destructive suspicions come from? James had never questioned Samuel's irreproachable moral character before these last few torturous months. Something specific and deliberate, or more likely someone deliberately manipulative and calculating, had systematically planted these destructive seeds of doubt in his previously confident mind. And he knew exactly who was responsible for this psychological manipulation. Richard Blackwood had always been a significant and persistent problem in his professional life. As the principal majority investor in James' revolutionary technology company and the privileged son of a traditionally influential and conservative Chicago family, Richard had never completely hidden his deep psychological discomfort with James' socially unconventional background and his non-traditional interracial family. "It's genuinely admirable and impressive," Richard would often comment diplomatically during formal executive meetings, "how you've managed to brilliantly overcome your particular initial circumstances and non-traditional family background through sheer determination." Over the past 8 particularly tortuous weeks, Richard had deliberately intensified seemingly subtle but psychologically poisonous comments about Samuel and his constant and influential presence in James's personal life. "James, have you ever seriously asked yourself why your adoptive father consistently refuses to accept substantial and generous financial assistance? Genuinely proud men sometimes hide very different and questionable alternative motivations," Richard would insinuate with feigned friendly concern. "You should be significantly more cautious with people who have unrestricted access to your personal residence and valuable assets, James. Sometimes those who are emotionally closest are precisely those who can potentially hurt the most deeply and devastatingly," he continued his poisonous insinuations. "Have you noticed specifically how certain valuable things mysteriously disappear always precisely after his monthly visits? Statistical coincidence seems mathematically improbable and suspicious." Richard planted his seeds with surgical precision and calculated patience. James had initially dismissed these insinuations as unnecessary gossip and office chatter, but Richard was psychologically persistent and strategically patient, planting seeds of doubt with the calculated precision of an experienced manipulator and skilled emotional sociopath. On the morning immediately following the devastating and revealing test, James urgently called Samuel requesting an immediate and crucial personal conversation. The older man arrived visibly worried and anxious. James had never requested emergency meetings before in 27 years of solid family relationships. "Dear father," James said, only partially able to look directly into Samuel's kind and trusting eyes, "I need to confess something absolutely terrible and shameful that I have done to you." "What happened specifically, my son? You seem upset." "I have criminally suspected you without any concrete evidence. I mistakenly thought you were systematically taking valuable things from my home during your visits." The silence that followed was emotionally devastating for both men. Samuel seemed to literally age 10 years instantly, as if an invisible and cruel force had completely drained his life energy and hope. "You genuinely thought I was deliberately stealing from you, my own son?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking with deep hurt and emotional betrayal. "Dad, I feel more than I can adequately express. I honestly don't know how I could have even thought something so horrible and unfair, James said, his voice trembling with genuine remorse. James, Samuel said, his voice completely broken by devastating emotional betrayal, I raised you fundamentally better than this. I taught you methodically that true character has absolutely no relation to skin color, that genuine family is always about unbreakable mutual trust, that real love never suspects without concrete, irrefutable evidence. I know that perfectly well, Father. I know. But someone specific was deliberately putting poisonous ideas into my head in a systematic and calculated manner. Who exactly would do something so cruel? Richard Blackwood. He has been making calculated comments, psychological insinuations for weeks, planting doubts about you. Samuel's facial expression changed dramatically from deep hurt to clear understanding, then to a silent but intense fury that James had rarely witnessed in their entire life together. I understand perfectly now, Samuel said quietly, but with growing, controlled intensity. The man who consistently never greets me politely when we meet socially. Who deliberately looks through me as if I were completely invisible. Who always subtly questions why you treat me like genuine family. Dad, he systematically manipulated my mind psychologically like a predator. But I should have been emotionally stronger and resisted the manipulations. Samuel stood up determinedly, walking over to the large window with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. James, do you know exactly what hurts me the most in this terrible situation? It's not that you criminally suspected me. It's that you temporarily forgot who patiently taught you to be who you really are. What do you mean specifically, Dad? When you were little and vulnerable, do you clearly remember when Mr. Peterson falsely accused you of stealing candy from his store? Just because you were an adopted child of questionable origin and different. James vividly remembered that traumatic moment. Mr. Peterson, the prejudiced owner of the neighborhood store, had automatically assumed James was a thief based solely on deep social and racial prejudices. You asked me desperately why he thought that unfairly of you. I said, word for word and clearly, precious son, some people judge others by the color of their skin, their family background, their social status. But you must never be one of those prejudiced people. You judge people solely by their consistently demonstrated character, not by their physical appearance. The realization hit James like a shot to the heart. I did exactly what I solemnly swore I would never do in my life. You allowed someone else to plant seeds of systematic racism in your mind. Poisonous seeds that I thought I had completely eradicated long ago through loving education. James immediately hired the best private investigator in all of Chicago, Patricia Chun, a former federal agent specializing in complex corporate cases and sophisticated psychological manipulation, to find out exactly who Richard Blackwood really was behind his respectable and polished social facade. What she methodically uncovered through detailed investigation was infinitely worse than any nightmare James could have imagined in his darkest moments. James, Patricia said during her detailed presentation of meticulously compiled evidence, Richard is not simply casually prejudiced. He is literally an active, ideological white supremacist. The evidence compiled was absolutely overwhelming and meticulously documented through legal methods. Richard had grown up in a family with a documented history of active racial segregation, frequented exclusively private clubs that still deliberately practiced systematic racial exclusion, and maintained a 20-year pattern of behavior systematically sabotaging interracial relationships and adoption processes. Look carefully at this. Patricia showed screenshots of Richard's private posts in closed supremacist groups. He wrote verbatim, "Interracial adoptions are fundamentally dangerous social experiments for American social stability. Eventually, the true and primitive nature inevitably reveals itself publicly." He also posted specifically and maliciously, "James Morrison is living proof that you can physically take someone out of the ghetto, but you can never psychologically take the ghetto out of someone. Sooner or later, he will show his true primitive genetic colors," Patricia continued, revealing increasingly shocking evidence. James felt violent nausea rising in his throat. He wasn't genuinely trying to protect me paternally. He was systematically trying to prove a repugnant pseudoscientific racist theory. Exactly right. And there is much more damning and criminal evidence. I discovered that Richard has been subtly but systematically removing valuable items from his residence during social events, strategically planting them elsewhere to deliberately create the psychological illusion that Samuel took them. What are you saying specifically? That's impossible. Patricia showed footage from previously unnoticed and archived security cameras. Here is Richard deliberately hiding his Cartier watch in the coat Samuel left hanging during the corporate Christmas party. Here he is systematically taking money from his wallet and purposely dropping it near where Samuel was sitting during Thanksgiving dinner. James watched everything with growing psychological horror and utter disbelief. Richard had meticulously orchestrated an elaborate and cruel psychological campaign to systematically destroy the most important and sacred relationship of his entire life through calculated manipulation. Why would he specifically do something so diabolical? James asked, his voice trembling with growing, controlled anger. Absolute psychological control over you and your business decisions. As long as you have Samuel as your moral and spiritual anchor, you naturally make business decisions based on the ethical values he has methodically taught you. Richard specifically wants a partner who makes decisions based solely on maximum profit without moral or ethical considerations. And he has almost completely succeeded in manipulating and controlling me. James, there is an additional revelation that you absolutely need to know immediately. Richard is actively planning something much bigger and more destructive against your family and reputation. Patricia showed recently intercepted emails obtained through legal investigative methods. Richard was secretly organizing an extraordinary board meeting to officially question James' psychological fitness as CEO, based specifically on questionable judgment and problematic non-professional influences. He will publicly use his unfounded suspicion of Samuel as prima facie evidence that you lack the psychological discernment to lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation with fiduciary responsibility. James felt a cold, calculating rage he had never experienced in his entire existence. He deliberately tried to destroy my family to control me business-wise and financially. And he has nearly succeeded in completely achieving his goal through systematic psychological manipulation. The extraordinary board meeting was strategically scheduled for Monday at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning. Richard had called an urgent session to officially discuss James' questionable leadership. He had no idea that James was meticulously prepared with devastating and irrefutable evidence. Distinguished and respected members of the board, Richard began formally, I am deeply concerned about the recent judgment of our chief executive officer. His executive decisions have been systematically compromised by highly questionable and unprofessional outside influences. What specific influences are you referring to? Asked Margaret Wells, senior board member and former CEO of Wells Financial. James has been psychologically manipulated by questionable figures from his past who may not have his best corporate interests at heart. People who deliberately take advantage of his natural generosity and position of power for personal and financial gain. James rose calmly, his presence completely dominating the luxurious executive conference room. Richard, are you referring specifically to my beloved father? Adoptive father, Richard corrected with deliberately venomous and contemptuous emphasis. And yes, I firmly believe that his executive judgment has been systematically compromised by misguided and dangerous loyalty. Interesting observation, James said, calmly turning on a high-definition projector. Because I have some absolutely fascinating revelations to present about truly compromised judgment and criminal behavior. The first high-resolution image showed Richard deliberately taking James' watch during the corporate Christmas party. Angle 1, James said professionally, moving on to the next crystal-clear video. Richard Blackwood systematically stealing my personal belongings to deliberately create the illusion that my father took them. The entire board watched in growing silence and disbelief as James methodically showed video after video of Richard planting false evidence. Angle 2, Richard systematically hiding money to frame a completely innocent man. Angle 3, Richard deliberately leaving objects in strategic places where my father would inevitably find them during his family visits. This is literally impossible and a fabrication, Richard stammered, his professional composure completely crumbling in the face of the irrefutable evidence projected on the screen. But there is much more devastating and criminally compromising evidence, James continued relentlessly. Patricia, show them the social media posts and private messages. Richard's racist messages completely filled the massive screen in the conference room. Posts about dangerous social experiments and true genetic colors appeared sequentially, each more repugnant and shocking than the last, revealing Richard's true supremacist nature. Richard Blackwood, James said, his voice cold as Arctic ice. You have spent months systematically psychologically manipulating to destroy my family through lies and elaborate theater. You have criminally stolen from me to frame my innocent father. You have actively conspired to take control of this company by removing the one person who keeps me morally balanced and grounded. James, you don't fully understand the complex situation. I understand perfectly well. You are a white supremacist who cannot psychologically accept that a black man has created someone infinitely more successful, moral, and respected than you will ever be. At that precise and dramatic moment, the double doors of the room swung open magnificently and Samuel entered with dignity, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and a respected journalist from the Chicago Tribune. Samuel Morrison, James announced solemnly to the entire room, the man of integrity whom Richard has systematically tried to destroy through lies and manipulation. The exemplary man who taught me that true character has absolutely no color or origin. The man who deserves complete justice and public recognition. Richard Blackwood, Detective Martinez said officially, you are formally charged with aggravated robbery, criminal conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and systematic racial harassment. As Richard was carefully handcuffed, he looked at Samuel with pure distilled racial hatred. You don't deserve to be here in this room. You're not real family. Samuel looked at him with genuine pity and Christian compassion. Lost son, real family is about unconditional love, not genetic blood. It's about lifting each other up morally, not tearing each other down out of envy. It's something sacred that you'll never be able to understand because of the hatred in your heart. James approached Richard one last time before being led away. You systematically tried to teach me that I couldn't trust the man who raised me with love. But all you've done is remind me exactly why he's the best man I've ever known. 6 months after the public exposure, James was in the same luxurious office where he had tested Samuel, but now the atmosphere was completely transformed and charged with genuine and meaningful purpose. Samuel was permanently there, not as a monthly visitor, but as the official president of the Morrison Foundation, a multimillion-dollar organization dedicated exclusively to supporting interracial adoptive families throughout the United States and internationally. My dear son, Samuel said, meticulously reviewing scholarship proposals, did you know that we have 347 families on the official waiting list for educational and financial assistance? Then let's substantially expand operations and hire more staff, James replied without hesitation. Money is definitely not an issue for our mission. Richard Blackwood had been sentenced to 5 full years in federal prison on multiple serious criminal charges. His reputation was completely and irreversibly destroyed in all social and business circles, his shares in the company were legally confiscated, and he became a national case study on how systematic racism can lead to complete personal and professional self-destruction. More significantly, the case had sparked a crucial national conversation about interracial adoptive families and the unique psychological challenges they face on a daily basis in contemporary American society. James, Samuel said during one of the Foundation's weekly meetings, do you know what makes me most proud as a father? What specifically, dear father? It's not that you became an internationally recognized billionaire. It's not that you built a revolutionary technology company. It's that when you had to choose definitively between money and family, between business success and fundamental moral values, you chose correctly without hesitation. The Morrison Foundation quickly became the largest organization supporting interracial adoptions across the country. James implemented groundbreaking policies at the company ensuring that family backgrounds were never used against employees. And the Richard Blackwood case became absolutely legendary as the definitive example of how hatred ultimately destroys itself completely. Dad, James said during one of the Foundation's weekly dinners, thank you for never giving up on me, especially when I didn't deserve your patience. Son, Samuel replied with absolute conviction, genuine family never gives up under any circumstances. Family fights for each other. Family forgives completely. Family endures everything together. 2 years later, on Father's Day, James stood before 500 adoptive families at the Morrison Foundation's annual gala. My father, he said, his voice strong with genuine emotion, taught me that value isn't measured in bank accounts, but in character. That success isn't about money accumulated, but about lives positively transformed. That family isn't about sharing DNA, but about sharing dreams and core values. He paused dramatically, looking directly at Samuel in the front row. Richard tried to teach me not to trust the man who raised me. Instead, he taught me to value him even more. Samuel stood up, tears streaming down his face, and father and son embraced as 500 families, every color, every combination, every beautiful difference, applauded enthusiastically as love completely conquered hate. If this story of family, forgiveness, and love triumphing over hate touched your heart, sign up to discover more stories that prove family isn't about where you come from, but about who stands faithfully by your side when life gets tough and challenging.